I'm Randy Carver, president of Carver Financial. Appreciate everybody coming out tonight. Pretty timely event with 13 days till the election. So we look forward to hearing all of your questions. So we're going to do a town hall format. So I'm going to ask about 12 questions of Peter, and then we're going to open up to all of you if you guys have anything. Now, you've probably heard that the saying, this is the most important election of our time. And that always sounds kind of like a cliche, I think. But, truly each election has its own unique implications, and there's no exception here. So the timing of this will be great. We're going to talk about some of the developments, the major issues that people are talking about, the implications should either party win, and then kind of get into what we think is going to happen. Peter has been involved with government affairs for 45 years. He's worked at the Allianz for 36 years at this point. His resume includes roles as staff attorney for the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, Congressional Counsel, not to mention leadership as chairman of the government affairs committees for various national organizations. Peter holds degrees from Georgetown and Syracuse University, and so we're pleased to have him. I also want to take a minute to thank all the sponsors, because we certainly couldn't do this without the support of a number of companies, JP Morgan, Principal Funds, PGIM, Vanguard, Transamerica, Invesco, American Century, John Hancock, and Nuveen. And without them, again, we couldn't hold these types of public events. The last thing is, in 2013, we started something called Carver Cares. The idea being to bring awareness of local nonprofits in our county, both to help them, but also to help all of you and make you aware of resources that might be available. Our Carver Cares partner this evening is the Lake Humane Society. I was surprised to learn they were founded in 1937, so they've been around quite a while. They're out in Perry before moving to the Tyler Road address in 1988, where they've been ever since. They're a no-kill shelter, so they don't euthanize the animals, so they're always looking for good homes. And their efforts really do lead to a more humane Lake County through a number of interesting programs, including adoption, Meals on Wheels for the animals, a pet food pantry, and then some work with feral populations. Their operating budget is about $1.8 million, and they receive no money from state, federal, or local government. They're entirely funded by donations and revenue from operations. So, as always, if anybody does choose to support them, we'll match donations in the next 30 days up to $4,000. For those people that are looking something fun to do, they're always looking for volunteers, also foster families and adoptive families. So we do have a number of folks from Lake Humane here. They'll be outside if you have questions for them, which I think is great. So, obviously we're here to talk about what's on everyone's mind, the election, and the markets, what we think is going to happen. I would be remiss if I didn't say, regardless of election outcomes, over time, markets move up. So I'm not going to say it doesn't matter who wins, because it does have implications for the economy, tax policy, social policy. But as far as the markets themselves, they do tend to trend up. And frankly, once the election's over and we have some certainty, things tend to stabilize. Markets can assimilate bad news, but they don't like uncertainty. And obviously in 14 days, we're going to know where we're at. So with that, I'm going to ask Peter some questions, and then we're going to jump into all of you guys. Hopefully we'll see what we've got. So we're sitting here less than 2 weeks, away from the election. At this point, we've had a new candidate, essentially. It's done one debate, came in late in the race. What do you see as the biggest swing factors? This election, saying it's going to come down really to independent and undecided voters. What do you see as the biggest swing factors and maybe the biggest issues remaining that each candidate could pursue to grab that middle ground?
Well, first thing, the swing factors are there because but this should not surprise us. We've had 6 presidential elections in the 21st century, and with the exception of the Obama victory in 2008, all of them have been close. Swing of 1 or 2%, now 7 states, used maybe 8 or 9, would have made the difference. And the issues are out there, and there's a differentiation, and you've heard the various differentiations, but we also know walking into this election, whatever happened, former President Trump would have 47% of the national vote, and Kamala Harris probably would have had 48 to 49%. Was this better? Good. Oh, okay. So I talked about the 6 presidents. Yeah, so it's going to be close because it always has been close over the last 20 years. And I think it's a repeat of 2016 and 2020, whether we like it or not. I always say about 2016, a change of 45,000 votes in 3 strategic states, Hillary Clinton would have been president. And in 2020, change to 75,000 votes in 3 states, Donald Trump would have remained president. And of course, we also had the most peculiar anomaly, and that was in 2000, where Al Gore lost by 500 votes in the state of Florida. Change of 250 votes would have made the difference. You look at that and you sort of see the size of the country, and you can see why this is going to be tight. All of them are focusing in on issues that they think will drive their voters, and frankly use and also to go off against the other side. That's how politics is. For President Trump, he's using the normal things that you would expect. Is she a California liberal? He would identify her as such. She probably would have done the same 6 years ago, but that's another matter. What is the Biden record on economics and inflation and all of that call deficient? Now, there's a variety of reasons for why inflation went up over the last 5 years. And that was a variety of things, the COVID money and also supply chain problems. And also, we didn't have inflation for 20 years. It finally got caught up with us. And he's going to go after border security and immigration. That is an issue that has resonated with voters. And he's doing all that quite artfully. And this is what's driving his campaign, those fundamental issues. Now, she's got issues too. And what's going to has driven her campaign are some different things. Number one, and probably most pronounced, is the abortion issue. The overturn of the Dobbs decision altered, moved all the rights to the abortions back to the states where they used to be before Roe v. Wade. And what you're seeing in many states are pretty much the same, but in other states, large number of states, particularly in rural states and southern states, very, very restrictive abortions, and at times intrusions on the rights of a woman to possibly even consult with her physician or her physician to take actions to protect her life. These things going a little far. Sometimes some of the bans were as much as 6 weeks limitation, even before a woman becomes pregnant. And that has resonated, or at least Vice President Harris believes, with many younger women voters, and possibly with their middle-aged mothers and maybe their older grandmothers who look at different days. She's also focusing in on another matter, and that would be health care. A lot of people in this room might have had concerns, and probably still do, about the Obama health care plan. It was controversial in 2010 when it was adopted, and still controversial. And it would be, and many of the same problems you're confronting now would have still been there, even if they had just kept it the same. Just the nature of health care, nobody's ever 100% satisfied. But there's one element of the Obama health care plan that has survived scrutiny and is now fairly well accepted, and that's pre-existing conditions. Because back before 2010, we all were worried. If we didn't have insurance, if you're still in the workforce and you lost your job, you didn't know what you were going to do, particularly if you had a medical precondition. She's using that matter. She's also going after the fact on the border security. President Trump has a point, but Biden and Harris tried to do something earlier this year. They got around to it a little too late from my perspective, but they got something. That was a pretty good deal with Republicans that would have further restricted and vetted immigrants, and they walked away from the deal. And finally, the last issue really is Donald Trump himself, the character, the chaos that surrounds him, and the events of January 6th. And there's one matter, too, that I would emphasize with Vice President Harris. You look for differentiations, how you want to get a little bit of the other side. And there's one area, all those issues, she thinks she'd probably succeed, but she has come out forthrightly in favor of Ukraine. President Trump has not really done that. And that might reflect what her values are and reflect her genuine positions, but also might be smart politics, because there was one matter, that's probably one of the most significant matters that almost evenly divides the Republican Party, whether or not the United States should be providing assistance to Ukraine. So that's where all those issues are, and they're big issues, and I think they're both arguing, all of them, with some degree of effectiveness, and that explains why things are so close today, but there are other factors as well.
Okay, so let's look at House and Senate for a minute. When historically, we look at the party control of the Senate, when Republicans have control, stocks averaged about 11% a year.
Right.
When Democrats, it's about 6.3%. That's for the 75 years ending in 2021. In the House, when Republicans control the House, stocks made about 10.7 versus 7% under Democrats. And yet with the White House, Democrats have the edge with a 9% annual return, while Republicans are about 7%. So what's your thoughts as far as the downstream races? Do you see any kind of coattail effect, and where do you think that's going to end up?
It's hard to have coattail effects when both of them are running at 50-50. There are no coattail effects. But you do have a natural agglomeration within states. Not only people are divided, but within states you become solidly red or solidly blue. And you look at what's happened over the last 2 generations. New England used to be sort of mixed periodically. Back until the early 90s, you had the senior senator, 2 senators from South Dakota, 2 senators from North Dakota were Democrats. Never going to happen again. And Nebraska had 2 Democratic senators. Rhode Island had 2 Republican senators. It's all changed. We have co-aligned around one party in most states, and that remains the same way this year. Both political parties, or both House of Representatives right now and the U.S. Senate, are really on a knife's edge. Any little thing can move it. It's a 51-49 Democratic majority in the United States Senate right now. Senator Manchin from West Virginia, Democrat, is retiring. The governor of that state, Jim Justice, he's certain to win re-election. He's going to probably win 70%, 30%, as will President Trump. So that's 50-50. Senator Chester in Montana is having some difficulties. He's a good senator, by the way, but he's in Montana. He's probably going to lose. That should give the Republicans a 51 votes. They only have 1 seat that I think is possibly vulnerable right now, and that probably would be Texas. And probably if Senator Cruz looked like he liked people, he might be solving that problem himself. But that's another, it's just an observation. It helps if you look like you like people, but he'll probably end up winning. But Democrats, they have their issues. They've got the vulnerabilities here in Ohio. Bernie Moreno's running a good race against Sherrod Brown, who always has a way of managing to pull it out, but we don't know what's going to happen here. And in Pennsylvania, you have a similar situation with Senator Casey. I think ultimately, but deep down, I would bet that the Republicans will end up controlling the Senate. House of Representatives is just too hard to really define. Republicans have a 4-seat majority of a 435-person body. They've had a difficult time operating it. And if I had to predict anything, I would predict that the Democrats will end up picking the votes. They'll end up picking the votes primarily because of a variety of issues and matters. But you have 5 Republicans who were elected in 2022 in New York. They're all a little bit vulnerable right now. New York's going to go overwhelmingly Democratic for president. And California also had a pretty good Republican year in 2022, and that might change. So I think the map slightly favors the Democrats, but it's going to be whatever it's going to be. It's going to be very, very tight and very, very difficult to control.
Okay, so one of the clear differentiators between the Harris and Trump planks of their policy is tax policy. Essentially, Harris feels like she should tax corporations and the wealthy. Trump wants to use tariffs. I don't know if that's too simple or not, perhaps, but what are your thoughts, on the tax policy? And can you give some thoughts on unintended consequences of increasing taxes on corporations versus what tariffs might do?
Yeah. There's a reality check that has to be applied to both of them on tax policy. The fundamental reality for the right now that exists is, as all of you know, the Trump Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, part of the provisions expire at the end of 2025. Not the corporate taxes. They specifically kept corporate taxes and made them somewhat eternal. You have to change the law in order to change them, mostly because they wanted businesses to invest and have the long-term commitment that goes by having lower taxes. We went from then 35% to 21%. Much better than, frankly, most of the business community thought they were going to get. Most thought we were going to end up at 25%. Anyways, it's pretty good. But the bigger problem right now is the personal tax cuts expire. And it costs a lot of money to maintain those tax cuts, probably up to about $1 trillion a year. And here's where they've got, here's the problematic portion of it. Most people do not want those tax cuts to expire. They like the lower rates, but probably the biggest thing in the minds of most Americans, and maybe including the people in this room, so many people in this room, is the standard deduction. It's now at $15,000, $30,000 a year for a married couple. It's pretty good. If that gets repealed, it's going to go back to $12,000. So there's an institutional imperative to preserve the basic standard deduction right now. There's going to be some cost. Vice President Harris says, frankly, and this is what she would say, well, we got to pay for at least part of it. And therefore, we ought to raise taxes on upper income individuals making more than $400,000 a year. And we also have to raise corporate taxes as well. And if she's elected president with a composition of a full Democratic majority, which she's going to control the House and Senate, which I sincerely doubt. She might get at least some of that, but she's not going to be able to get very much of that should there be a Republicans control the House or the Senate. There'll be a change. President Trump had used taxes as sort of a policy, as a giveaway plan. I'm going to make everything better by lowering taxes. I'm going to keep the current tax cuts. I'm no longer going to contest Social Security. We're going to reinstate the SALT deduction, which would benefit the high tax states of California, New York, and Washington, D.C., where I live, so I sort of like that one. But he had a number of other things that he's talking about, and they're all, I would say, designed to sort of develop public support. All politicians do this. No longer going to tax Social Security. No longer going to tax tips on wages earned from tips. We're no longer going to do a variety of other things. We're going to allow the full deductibility of auto loans. And this sort of flies, and all of these things cost a fair amount of money. We're going to lower tax rates to 15%. That would cost the government probably another $600 billion, about $500 billion a year. All things are out there, and the reality, there's two realities. One, it'd be very difficult to get done. Our deficits are already horrendous. And while it might promote a certain element of economic vitality by lowering rates, it usually does to a point. But it also might end up scaring away the bond market and create the inflation that we're worried about reappearing. So this is where they are. They have two different philosophies. Both are very consistent. Republicans generally prefer lower taxes, but they're judicious about how far they could go because they don't want to upset things too further. And the Democrats generally like raising taxes, particularly on upper-income individuals and businesses. But they're also judicious because the reality is if they're not judicious, they'll never get anything.
Oh, so you just mentioned actually about the debt. And the debt to GDP, it's below where it was during COVID.
Right.
But it's still higher than pretty much any time since World War II. And we know it's going up. So obviously, one of the biggest spends is entitlements. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. It's, I think, roughly 60-something cents on the dollar. What do you see happening with entitlements with either party winning or just in general?
I see it's going to be kick the cans down the road all over again, and we should all be aware of should be aware of the numbers, how large they are. It's $36 trillion, and I was in downtown Cleveland yesterday, and I see the scoreboard up there, 35,750 billion, and the numbers are just going up as I'm driving down the highway. And you sort of see what the problem really is. Right now, if we are spending $7 billion a year, and we're collecting $7 trillion a year, and we're collecting $5 trillion in revenue. 10% of that is corporate taxes. About 35 or 40% are payroll taxes, about 45% is income taxes, and 2% tariffs. It's just the rough numbers over here. But the biggest thing on the agenda over the last 12 months, the biggest expenditure is interest on the national debt. $5 trillion, $1 trillion going to the national debt just to pay the interest rates. And if we look anywhere down the future, if we don't do anything, if we let all the Trump tax cuts expire, and so maybe taxes go up and so forth on personal, we're talking that's $2 trillion a year. Add to that sort of the new expenditures either planned by Vice President Harris, which will be expensive, or the additional tax cuts by President Trump, the trajectory could go to $3 trillion a year. And you're going to be paying interest on that. So you're getting to that point now where we ought to do something. But if you want to do something, it's going to have to be, you have to get responsible. And it's going to require an honest conversation with the American public that no politician wants to have. We've got to do something about this. And there's only a couple of ways of doing it. We have to, raise revenue, or we're going to have to cut expenditures. Now, the interesting one I always serve as most aside is probably the one that is, most near and dear to all of us is Social Security. And Social Security is probably the one that's easiest to solve. There aren't that many variables. They're all pure actuarial tables. You know how much people have in there and how much they don't and all that. But you're going to have to do something for the next generation. And there's a temptation to sort of say, well, we'll take care of it and let's just let young people pay for it. They can retire at age 74, 75, 40 years from now. And that's not fair to them. And many of them, frankly, are not like people in this room or like me, who might have had long lives and did not do difficult physical work. And that wears people out. You're going to have to look at a number of things to solve that one, including looking at existing people who are in the workforce now, payroll taxes, a variety of things that, frankly, if we got into details, every one of us would have a good reason to oppose any one of them. But that's the problem. Nothing can be done unless there's a mutuality of pain, and we are not prepared for it right now, but there will come a period of time where we have to be prepared for it. And of course, like all problems, the longer you wait, the bigger the problem.
Okay, let's talk maybe global agenda here. You mentioned the support of Ukraine by Kamala versus perhaps Trump. We have two active wars. We've got China and Taiwan, obviously, potential issue. What kind of post-election global issues do you see? What are you looking for? And what's your biggest global policy concern?
It's a nice evening, and I don't want to get too pessimistic, but right, yeah, there really is. One night now, there's an article from George Will a few weeks ago that some of you might have seen, and he says we might be at the beginning of World War III, God forbid, but it shows all the same sides. World War III didn't start off with a major boom. It started off with a number of smaller events. And Winston Churchill, in his first volume of his 6-book anthology, called his first one was The Gathering Storm. Started off with the Japan invasion, incursion in Manchuria, 1931. They took it over in 1938. Italy takes over Ethiopia in 1935. Hitler goes into the Czech Republic and Austria in 1938. And you sort of see where this is going. Are we at that period of time? We've got 3 major global conflicts with the powers that are all aligned, whether directly or indirectly, against not only the United States, but the entire civilized Western world, people who share our values. You've got, if I was here probably a year ago, I might have said Israel, Gaza, Palestine, but it's not Israel, Gaza, Palestine. It's an Iranian proxy war that's out to destroy Israel, but also out to destroy some of Israel's neighbors. And it's doing awful things right now vis-a-vis our own country in terms of misinformation, trying to get involved in our campaigns, did the same in Europe, did the same in the UK, and has done the same in Australia. They're out there. That's one. The Russians are intent upon the rebuilding of the Russian Empire. They're now aligned with North Korea. There's no great surprise there. They're out there. They won't stop with Ukraine. It's Moldova, and eventually it could be the Baltic states, and then that brings NATO into it. That worries me. And then we have China. China is an emerging power. It's more like global, it's more like climate change. It hasn't happened yet, but eventually they want and they will get Taiwan. I just hope it doesn't happen anytime soon. But they're proving themselves to be not only a great economic power, but they're flexing their muscles militarily. They're doing really nasty excursions trying to get off in near the Philippines and Japan and South Korea, Taiwan, of course, Malaysia. They're flexing their muscles, and the bad kids in the school are the ones that are sort of ganging up on the rest of us. And it should cause us to worry what's going on in the future, because China in particular, China has its own explosion issues. We sort of view them as it's a very phenomenally good economy, 40 years of really tremendous economic growth. But they have their own issues, the demographic problems. Population is going down. They don't have a retirement system. We do. I always say about the U.S. or in Western Europe, we got old after we became rich. But they got rich, but they got old before they became rich. And that creates its own set of problems. Financial, one-child policy programs from 1976 to 2016, it's just dreadful. They estimated the population, but there's too few women in this society. It's awful, all these girls who were committed to abortions, it's just dreadful, it's immoral and disgusting. But they have to live with that, and they also have declining economy, demography, pollution, and everything else. And so when you do that, sometimes if you feel threatened in a home and all these issues are emerging at home, it naturally creates a tendency, we're going to go outside of our home, and we're going to be muscular. That way we can rally support. And therefore, China's a vulnerable situation right now.
Two more questions. Then we're going to open it up. When we do ask you guys, we'd ask you to wait for the microphone. We're going to have a couple people running microphones around. Public trust in government, regardless of which side you're on, seems to have kind of eroded, and things have definitely become, more polarized. I guess kind of a multi-part question. One, what do you attribute kind of the polarization to? And then two, do you think the agendas are really that polarized, or it's more just what people are hearing from the various news channels? You hear the same story from MSNBC, Fox, and CNN, and you kind of know, what you're going to get.
I think a variety of things. They're also related, but it's not just people have lost faith in government. They've lost faith in all of our institutions in our society. And they used to have institutions that used to buttress them in their daily lives. Religious institutions, our churches and synagogues, that used to direct us. And I'm of that baby boom generation, as are a number of other people in this room. And we could have it all, and our parents were the ultimate conformists coming of the age of the Depression and World War II, and we sort of wanted it all. Well, sometimes there's a price to be paid for that. So you don't have the other buttressing institutions, educational institutions. Are they the educational institutions you want? Educational theories and what you're seeing at university campuses doesn't inspire me particularly right now. You've that gone on. You also have lost private sector labor unions. And a lot of us are business people, but private sector labor unions gave people a place in their society. And they also did some pretty good things on apprentice programs and so forth. We don't have those anymore. And all of those things have hurt our ability to get along as a people, because we really need institutions to guide us. And instead we're left on our own. We also are dealing with a situation where you've got the proliferation of news sources has made it worse. It's probably started off with cable news, and then it started off with talk radio in the 70s, talk radio, internet, social media, and now artificial intelligence. And ultimately, I think probably the most different one, it's probably been the most difficult for us to absorb, and the one that probably creates the most amount of problems for us, is what's happened in the year 2012. What happened? Two things happened in 2012. One, the iPhone became ubiquitous, and the iPhone met its match with Facebook. And all of that, and information was allowed to proliferate, and it should, because we all believe in whatever communications. But it ultimately did two things. One, we're getting bad information from a variety of sources that's not nuanced, it's not vetted, and we don't know where it's coming from. And it's also meant, as a society, we're not talking to each other. And when we don't talk to each other, we fall into cocoons. And one, it creates a significant degree of depression. People don't feel good. They don't have the bonds that really need to get through life. That makes them lonely and vulnerable. And that is probably another area which has to be explored. And all of that sort of leads to where we are right now, is a lot of fake news and polarization. And the worst thing in polarization can be is group polarization. You have the laws of group polarization. If I were to sort of sit you down and people in various views, and we sat here and we had a good time, we're on a cruise together or whatever and enjoying it, we wouldn't get into politics, and if we did, we'd figure out a way to modulate our message. We might actually start absorbing some of the information from each other, because none of us have an eternal truth. We all have opinions. That's how life is. We have opinions. But there's nothing eternal. But what's happening is our friends are becoming increasingly like us, people of one political persuasion or the other. And it's making it very much more difficult for us to find a common purpose, and for the United States to continue to exist and thrive, and for our local communities to do so. We need to find a common purpose, and there is no Republican truth or Democratic truth. They have facts, and they all have some things good about it. Blend it together. People are much more content that way, and you can go on and build your lives.
Okay. Two more in there, but one more, and then we'll open it up. Again, keep the microphone kind of close, because it's hard to hear if it's not up there. So, who's going to win? President, Congress, Senate?
You're not. Come on. How do you? I'm going to say the obvious. How could you determine an election where you look at what happened in Pennsylvania last time? 10 million people in Pennsylvania, 5.5 million people voted. President Biden wins it by 75,000 votes, less than 1%. And the variables are out there. I'll tell you what, both candidates are operating on the basis of that. Small variables are making the difference. They're right. And so what you say, well, I'll just tell you what I'm going to see. I'm going to eventually get to your answer, probably. But the variables right now are this. You watch President Trump, what's he doing? He's being quite rational. He does miserably. It's the biggest gender gap it has ever existed in history. It's about 16%. It's about 12% with Biden and Trump in 2020. He's not doing well with women. He knows he's never going to do well with women, so it's rational. He's not doing well there. But he's trying to build up much more support among men, and he's going after categories of men who might not have voted much in the past, and certainly never, but many might not have never have voted for a Republican. It's going after younger men who are disenchanted. They feel like their lives have sort of fallen asunder. Young men are not doing well in our society. They account for only 40% of the college graduates, and they're having a harder problem. He's going after them. He's going after, including among them, are Hispanic and African American men. Rational way to go, and so forth. Now, he does it in a message sometimes that's a little cruder than most traditional politicians, and that might have some effect. Might actually bring them in, but you also might be turning off some traditional Republican voters who don't like Donald Trump, and that's where Vice President Harris is going. Now, her perspective is she could win more suburban women. President Biden did fairly well on that one as well. But she could also win more Republican women. And even some more Republican men on the basis of, do you want the chaos? And here's what I am on Ukraine. And have you watched what he said about Arnold Palmer last weekend? I mean, all that type of stuff. You know where I'm coming from. So this is where it is, and it remains 50-50, and we're all going to be sitting there with our fingers clenched, whatever side you're taking.
Okay. Okay, we're going to start to ask questions. If you guys have questions, put your hands up. Paige has a microphone. Actually, we'll use this one too. Let me borrow this. Yep.
Okay.
We're going to send this one out. So we'll get a question. Who has a question?
Right here.
Up is one
Yes.
kind of right there. Then there's another back there.
Yes, what do you think about Trump and whole tariff situation?
I'm sorry, can you
20% or something like that?
Trump in the healthcare situation?
No, the tariffs.
Tariffs. I don't. Tariffs they really sound really good. I mean, it resonates with people. It doesn't resonate with, frankly, business people, but it does resonate with other people. And the issue on tariffs is it doesn't happen. There's a dynamic impact of tariffs. Now, the Democrats will say it's inflationary because the price of goods coming from China, other places are going to go up, and there's some truth. And if you're a manufacturer here in Ohio, you might be a little worried about it because so many of your components come from other nations, including China, Canada, Europe, whatever the case might be. But you also think it doesn't bring in that much revenue. It accounts for maybe 1.5% of total revenue. Now, even if he got everything he wants, it's about 3 or 4%. But the problem really is, when you're dealing with partners or you're dealing with other nations, they just don't sit there and let you take it in the shorts. They're going to fight back. And so I could also sort of see as one, it could be not only inflationary, it could disrupt supply chains, and it could hurt American exporters, because particularly agricultural exporters. That's one of our biggest marketplaces. The Chinese are already anticipating this, and they've already begun actions. What are they doing? They are turning to countries that also have desirable geographies. Argentina, Uruguay, Brazil. We're going to buy our food there. So I think the disruption to the economy would be so bad that President Trump, the reality of it, he would be forced to retrench. And the tariffs work okay under certain circumstances, maybe, and they've gotten used. President Biden has maintained some of them. Some of it's for politics. Some of it now is for economic resiliency, and on that basis, you could probably get away with that for a while, but eventually it's going to blow up in your face because of the realities of how the world is right now. And you might be forced to retrench. I mean, for President Trump, if he were to do so, I would imagine one of his most major constituencies and stalwart supporters are those in the agricultural community. And if they start finding their markets closed, it's going to be probably a very difficult time for them.
Okay. Back on the right side.
With the debt so ridiculously high, I'm curious as to why you think certain politicians insist on promoting more entitlements. And the only thing I can think of is so that people say, oh, I get XYZ for free, therefore I'll vote for you. But it's just causing nationally a higher crisis. So I'm just curious what your perspective is on why we're not promoting bringing down the debt, but adding to the debt.
Yeah, perspective on it is one thing on entitlement programs, they never go down. Now, there's an interesting article. Starting off with the Civil War, we limited our pension payments to only those people who suffered major injuries and to their immediate heirs, wife and children. Then we expanded it further to those who might not have had serious injuries, but minor injuries. Then we expanded it to those who, everybody who served. And you see the point here, we continue to expand them. And if you have the money to do so, and if your budget is in reasonably good condition, okay, that's fine. But our budget is not in good condition. I mean, typically for a country like ours, U.S. always had roughly 3% of GDP. Debts was 3% of GDP, 2 to 3, but our economy was growing at 4% per year. Our economy is not going to grow at 4% per year because we don't have as many workers. I came of age in like 1980 when I left law school. You had 4 million baby boomers walking into the workforce every year, and they're then middle-aged mothers who are also going back to work full-time if they had not already been doing so. You're not going to get that again. So 2.5% is all you could get, and the numbers are worse. Everybody wants to have the benefit, and you have one of them that's being cited by Vice President Harris, we could all relate to, and we all think it's a good idea, but we don't have the money for it. And that's home health care. It's a big problem. Everybody in this room has had to deal with this one for an aged relative, mother, grandparent, or whatever the case might be. You could provide it, but that's what's going to happen. One, one of the biggest problems, we don't have enough healthcare workers. And the other problem really is, or one of the things that's not a problem with how it's being done now, a good portion of it is probably being done by many of you in this room as you're assisting an elderly mother or father or father-in-law, mother-in-law, whatever the case might be. You're doing it yourself, you're funding it yourself, and you're doing all types of things. It would be nice to get relief, but if we all did so on an aggregate level, it's far beyond our capabilities. But it does play with people. People love promises. They want lower taxes, they want all of that. But the reality has not set in, and we were buffered for the first 20 years of this century by the fact that we were able to be somewhat profligate. We had a number of wars. We never paid for the wars. We had a pharmaceutical prescription, new benefit. President Obama does the Obamacare. And we ran deficits. They were not as horrendous as now. But because interest rates were so low between 2000 and 2020, interest on the national debt was $300 or $400 billion a year, not a big deal. Now we're up to $1 trillion. It is a big deal. We just can't go on like this. But there's not a constituency among the electorate, and the politicians think this is the case, and I think they're probably right now. The electorate does not want to hear pain. They don't want to hear sacrifice. They haven't heard it for the last 40 years, and they don't want to hear it now, but someday we're going to have to hear it.
Page 25. West.
I have a couple questions that maybe you can answer quickly. One, AI. I heard that the biggest number of people working without a college degree are long-haul truckers, and that the new driverless vehicles are going to put them out of a job, as well as professionals. I see doctors and lawyers that the AI can write contracts and review law reviews and medical histories better than they can. What do you think is going to happen with that? Second quick question is, maybe long answer, but with the green energy, I mean, I just think, without China, India participating in it, and we're spending trillions of dollars to bring this about, I don't see that as having a net effect. I do realize, global warming is a threat, but unless everybody is on board, I can't see spending the kind of money that's going to be involved with that. And the third question is, part of Harris's plan is to give new home buyers $25,000. Okay, Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank says anybody that sees that they're going to get $25,000, I can guarantee the price of all my homes is going up. And I understand that Vanguard and BlackRock are buying single-family homes in anticipation of that happening. Thank you.
Well, three good points. I'll just take them in probably reverse order. Certainly the $25,000 $25,000 contribution to purchasing a new home is inherently inflationary, and it's a campaign gimmick. You've heard it on the other side on taxes, on Social Security. I would love to get my taxes reduced when I start taking them pretty soon, but not going to happen. Artificial intelligence is, you are right there. It's a difficult one, but I can't really, I don't understand all the variables of artificial intelligence. You wouldn't expect anybody my age to do so. But I also understand the history of economies and the history of the democratic system and a history of a market-based economy. We end up always adept. There's always going to be a disruptive new technology that takes over our jobs. There was automation. There continues to be automation. You look at agricultural, where in 1890, about 60% of the population was doing agricultural work. We're down to 1% today. We're not any worse off for it. So we always find a way to sort of wrap ourselves around it. My concern, frankly, long term is one of the areas which has become one of the biggest sectors, and I'm nothing against it, it's just the healthcare industry, but how valuable of that is that? Not everybody can work in healthcare, and plus it's extremely expensive. It's a sensitive matter because I also worry on the social basis. You sort of see a lot of the traditional, as we've seen in manufacturing, the traditional jobs that paid men and women, but probably more men, trucking jobs or manufacturing jobs, gave them a middle-class lifestyle and something to aspire to. And once they fall off the wagon, our societies become that much more unwrapped. So that is on that one. And on climate change, I would agree with you. We can't really do it alone, but I also sort of say you also look at them from a perspective is you could do something. You could do something both to address climate change. I've been in the property casualty business for 40 years. It's there, and our costs are going up the roof, and we're going to pay for it. You want to have adaptive technologies, but you want to have adaptive technologies not only for us, but for the rest of the world. We got to get our act together. We could, it's their perspective in India and China. You and I will disagree with them. Is we did our pollutions all hundreds of years, and now they're getting their turn to be a polluter. But but for businesses and industries, some of the adaptations will be much more efficient, whether it's natural gas or nuclear or hydro and other things. It might be worthwhile because it frankly might lower the cost of inputs of electricity and all the other energy sources. We also might want to go back to, is two things. One is hydrogen and the mini nuclear reactors. If we could succeed in getting those done and we can export it to the rest of the world, it's a matter of time. The Chinese also want to get adaptive new technologies. Probably they're doing some of it themselves. So it's not necessarily money wasted because lots of the things that are being done are also just making us more efficient. The problem when you do all of that, right, as you're sort of seeing with coal right now, is the number of people engaged in coal production is going down. It's detrimental. You've got to take care of these people. But it's been going on for 30 years, and President Trump has sometimes talked about we're going to bring back coal. Well, it's nice of him to say, not going to happen. Nobody's going to invest in a coal facility. It's too expensive, and nobody wants to get stuck with a stranded asset. So you could do a variety of these things that might look like it's environmental, but ultimately might also be beneficial in the long term for our economies as we look for more innovative ways to sort of get our energy production done.
Question will be open to a staff.
So what do you see as the impact on businesses, and probably specifically small businesses, if there would be an increase in the national minimum wage to $15 an hour?
So that's a hard one. I mean, frankly, I'm not quite sure it's going to be. I mean, for most of the businesses and people who have business in this room, you're already paying that anyways. The government doesn't really set the minimum wage. Target sets the minimum wage. Walmart sets the minimum wage. Costco sets the minimum wage. And that has happened, and you sort of see when they do so, it creates other problems. I mean, nothing against them. Their workers should get what they could get. That's how we are. It's an economy. But what's happened when you have them setting that wage, and I think it's great target workers are getting $20 an hour, fine. But what happens is now we can't get daycare workers because the daycare person it's always women. They might be making $14 and $15 an hour. It's much more attractive to me to go to Target, and it's probably a little easier for me too. More flexible. I can do what I want. So so I think the government they ought to raise the national. They're going to raise it, and they should because it's so low at 7.5 or 8 hours, which is ridiculous. And even in the most poorest areas of Mississippi, and nobody's ever paying for that. So I think it will get raised. It's more of a conscience point, but the importance of the minimum wage has been greatly diminished by the proliferation of the big box stores and others, and Amazon.com and the big employers. They're the ones that determine how much people get paid now.
Sorry.
One thing I would add, I think sometimes people get caught up about the exception. You hear about the town in California where the minimum wage is $50. But again, that's not a national type of thing, and I think sometimes we get focused on the exception as opposed to the rule. But the market effectively sets that. As Peter said, certainly much, much higher than anything the government's going to set, because they're just not going to set it, at $20, $25 per hour, which is really what the market's bearing at this point. All right, question back there.
Peter, since they have different economic policies, what do you think will happen as far as how will the markets react with a Trump victory and why, and with a Harris victory and why?
I don't think it's going to move either on the one because we already sort of know what's going to happen. I mean, we just, said it. I mean, Harris' victory is probably going to be coupled with at least a Republican Senate. It's going to limit her variables, and the economy also does it. So you look at, I mean, if you look at the last 5 years, if you project, 5 years ago, if I was here in 2019, and I told you that we're going to have COVID, it's going to close the economy down for 2 years. We're going to spend $7 trillion. We had 20% inflation. The country is at war with each other. But the stock market's going to double. You would have said, are you crazy? But that's what happened. You know, the markets have a way of reacting to the normal barometers, and they've done fairly. They did fairly well under the Obama years. I mean, they really actually was a pretty decent time. Part of it was coming after the financial collapse, so they made up for it. They did well under Trump, and they've done well under Biden. I think what you have to be careful on both of them is so far so good. If you go too much more into the debt, eventually it's going to pay up. That's going to get to you. Bond prices will start going up. The reality, we've been lucky in the United States is we haven't faced the reality of sort of a bond collapse like the UK did on a temporary basis 2 years ago. And that could hurt the marketplaces. But right now, from both of them, it's stable, but if their ability to do really bold, innovative things are much more restricted than, say, President Trump's ability just to lower taxes in 2017 when bond rates were negligible. They're not negligible now. And I think the markets they look like they're pretty well. You sort of know with her what to expect. You're not going to like a lot of it, but manage to figure it out. And with President Trump, he's good on regulation so far, but ultimately you also want to be careful on regulation. For those of us in the financial services industry, I want a good regulatory background. I'm a little bit worried about his embracement of crypto. I think this is an old man speaking. I'm worried a lot of people can end up getting burned. A lot of people are on a variety of the platforms right now gambling away, and it might not end up very well for them. So we have to be balanced and thoughtful.
Yes. With the formation of BRICS, the new international monetary system that was launched by Russia, China, South Africa, Brazil, and some other countries, the intention to topple the U.S. dollar world dominance. How do you see that affecting the U.S. stock market, inflation?
I only got part of that, just Russia, China.
Yeah, Russia, China, Brazil, South Africa,
Right.
Some other countries
Getting
formed
together.
an alliance to launch this new BRICS system
Yeah.
to topple the U.S. world dominance, the dollar. How do you see that affecting the U.S. economy, the inflationary rates, and the economy, the stock market?
It has an effect on the dollar. I mean, what's happening in the dollar is a variety of things. One is you got the bad guys. Brazil's not necessarily a bad guy, nor is India, but they're going to do their things. They're never going to get the dollar per se because we offer the most liquid markets in the world with a judicial system that enforces things fairly. And when any money you get in here, for the most part, you could always take out. China cannot do that, or other countries cannot. Certainly not 4 countries. Let's see, is this better? No. Well, anyways, and so you have that's what's happening there. But the U.S. is running into a problem right now. Not only our deficits, but we have weaponized the dollar repeatedly over the last 20 years, and for a variety of good reasons that you and I would support. After September 11th, we're going to deprive the terrorists of their ability to use the dollar. We're going to capture them. We did the same thing after the Russians invaded Crimea. We didn't do much on the military response, but we did that. We weaponized it against the Russia. We've been repeatedly doing this, but the bad guys, the people who are doing the damage, the people that we really want them to go under, they're smart enough. They're smart. They're not dumb. They're finding very effective ways to work around this, and it's reducing the leverage point. The more you use something, probably you'll lose something every time as they figure out new ways. So the dollar is here to stay, but the dollar is probably going to be a little more diminished. It's not going to be able to have the same shock value that you might have had 30 or 40 years ago when you deprived them access to the U.S. dollar. They figured out a way. It's inefficient. They're not going to use it all the time. You and I would never invest in it, but it's probably good enough for them because the alternative of being decoupled from the U.S. is worse. So this gives them something to fight back with.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I have two questions. I was just wondering how safe you think the crypto Bitcoin is, and also how advantageous is space exploration with the economy?
The crypto one is, I'm not an expert, but it's not an expert in that, but you also know that what worries me is it's sort of, I can see many positive uses. So all exchange systems are interesting, whether it's Venmo or Zelle, all things that, people like me never thought we were going to be using something that great 20 years ago, but they really do work good. But you also look, what is crypto doing? How much electricity is being produced? And who's benefiting from it? This is me musing. It's not an Allianz statement here because I don't know what the official position is there. But you have to worry about it because I watch these people on Robinhood and all the things that they're doing. Is it a form of gambling? What's going to happen when everything goes? What are the consequences? Who are they going to go running to? Say sort of a lot of nefarious people coming into the business. This is my perception. Somebody could sort of say this is the most wonderful way. We're going to disintermediate the banks and all those things. But the banks and all those things they do a pretty good job economically, but they also do a pretty good job policing for the government bad behavior as they find where drug money is going or criminal money is going or, or where people are evading their taxes and so forth. So this is my observation there. With space, it's a wonderful opportunity. It's exciting. I will let you know. Will the U.S. come back in? We'll stay in. They're there. You got new entrants. China is doing some pretty interesting stuff too. But I think, this is also again musing of when I was growing up, space we spent a large amount of money on space, but it brought the American people together. We were all part of the same great adventure. And if we could create that aura again of having a joint adventure which we have pride in, which might have some economic benefits that derive from it, it's probably worth paying them that amount of money. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure we could go back to 1962. I tend to doubt it. Go on.
Any other questions?
Wait,
We got one more.
One more.
Okay.
And this is either for Peter or Randy. The Harris campaign has said that they would implement a tax on unrealized lost gains. How is this possible?
It's not.
Okay.
First of all, you have a couple issues. When you talk about real estate, are you going to appraise real estate every year? It's just untenable. And then on top of that, if you tax a gain and the next year it goes down, do you get some sort of credit? How do you account for that? Typically taxes are realized when a gain is realized, other than with estates, which over a certain threshold you pay the tax. But I don't see that ever happening. And they've tried it. Certain states, New Jersey, attempted this, and they couldn't do it.
Oh.
After a year, they gave it up.
This is the campaign silly season. Both candidates have things, frankly, all of us think are objectionable. That one, I agree, absolutely. Probably not legal. You're not going to get political support for it. We all fear, it might be limited to billionaires. Eventually, they're going to go to my second home in Florida or whatever the case might be. Nobody likes that one. But you have the silly season. You also have President Trump on the silly season side. We're going to cap credit card debt at 12%. How could you do that? It's a magic wand at Visa, which is sitting there. It doesn't work that way. And so reality does set in. I was struck by the fact that I was looking at some YouTube videos of the Kennedy-Nixon debate of 1960. And you had these two very young men, actually. Kennedy looked really young. Nixon was 47. Kennedy was 43. And at the time, they both they were both cogent, none of the gimmicks. They spoke really thoughtfully, polite to each other, and they really talked directly to the American people as adults. And I know we're not going to go back to that, but it sounds so much better than what we're dealing with today.
Yeah, it is interesting if you watch the YouTubes of the old debates. Besides the civility, it is a much more nuanced conversation, for sure. Any other questions? Yep, we got one more. Hang on one sec, because we won't pick it up on the video.
The border, with all the illegals coming into the country, why is this happening? Why isn't somebody doing something, or is it just fake news?
Yeah, something has to be done. And this is an issue, I'll just give you the history of this one. You sort of had Democrats under President Biden. When President Biden came into office, it was after President Trump. And Democrats' party at that period of time sort of what changed their concepts of immigration was some of the Trump policies, where the Muslim ban or the separated families, and they sort of got a little ahead of their skis. And they didn't do anything as a result for 3 years, and they should have. About 3 million people came in per year, improperly vetted, we didn't know where they're from, all those things, disruptions to communities. You're familiar with that. On the other hand, they finally have gotten the religion there because it's political reality. But you also have this peculiarity of we want we don't want them, we don't want to, we want to have a process, but we also are heavily dependent upon immigrants to do the work that has to be done. I remember I was here in Ohio. I did a bicycle trip in 2022, this is anecdotal, from Cincinnati to Cleveland. And a lot of small towns we would end up, I was traveling with 5 other old guys. We were having a good time. And we were, most of the restaurants were closed during Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. The only ones that were open were the Mexican restaurants, where the family ran the restaurants, and it was quite good. But there was a major labor problem in 2022, so they're filling those jobs. But we need to have a process to vet them, to make sure that we have figure out where they're going to be settled, make sure they're not criminals, and so forth. And I think the American people, frankly, that's one area where nuance they might come to appreciate. We're not against immigrants. We know what they're doing. They're taking care of my grandmother someplace. But we also can't just have open borders. And that could be a relatively easy thing to fix, because right now I think there is a bipartisan consensus for something similar to that which Republicans and Democrats came up with earlier this year that would do it without harming our economy.
More of a comment. Historically, they did a poll after the Nixon-Kennedy debate, and those people that listened to the debate on the radio thought Nixon won, hands down. But those that watched it on television thought Kennedy won because of Nixon's demeanor. He appeared to be sweating and flustered. But on the radio, they said Nixon won the debate.
Observation, that's pretty good. It happens to me all the time. I do better. So I can relate to Nixon on that one. Yeah, that's true. But public perceptions are good. People like the aura, and those who know how to use it skillfully. President Clinton was masterful in it. President Reagan was masterful in it. And you have other presidents who are really good presidents, such as President George H.W. Bush. He was not masterful in it. Decent man. So. Does play into it. You do check your hair, make sure your tie, and make sure your zipper's up before you go on TV.
What are your thoughts regarding Social Security becoming a means-based benefit anytime soon?
It's never going to become directly means-based, but it already is very progressive in the sense that you're not going to, as much as you put in, you're not going to get as much as somebody who is poor. I mean, I always describe a cousin of mine who unfortunately passed away at age 66. And I was always helping him out when he went one problem after the other, but he was a very sweet person. And he was going to get his Social Security. He was happy about it. He was going to bring home $1,600 a month. That was more than he was ever making. And unfortunately, he never lived really long enough to benefit from it. So it's going to be, it would be that much more progressive. I could sort of see part of the solution would be it's going to be higher payroll taxes, and I could see some of that. I could also sort of see them eventually probably beginning to touch COLAs. I mean, the cost of living increases, to make them a little less generous on a percentage basis for those people who are better off than for people, maybe like somebody like my mother who's 93. She gets her $2,000 check, but maybe I shouldn't be, and she get the full COLA. I don't think I should be, really, given the circumstances we're in.
Do you think that the United States will move to the digital dollar?
I think so. Like I've been reading even Yellen talking about this. There's a place for it. It depends on what the world wants from us. Is it going to impede our ability? If it comes across, if we don't do so, will we no longer be the world's most premier reserve currency? We're already sliding down. Would it help? And then there are always elements, there's not a consensus about it. It could be a good thing because it's more efficient and all that, and maybe it would help us get additional capital to pay for our bonds. On the other hand, it could be used for nefarious purposes. Are they going to start auditing us more closely? Now, all the people in this room don't have to worry about that. But you sort of see where I am, is if you open the door there's a theory on probably conservative circles, this is going to be a way for the government to get into everything you want to do. Eddie?
It is interesting, though. If you look at the amount of currency versus digital money today, there's very little currency. Most transactions are digital. Now it's usually plastic or Venmo or Zelle. But there are a lot of places that don't even take cash anymore, and it's becoming less so. So the digital dollar, I don't know if it's as big a change as people might think, quite frankly. And again, you've got to differentiate between a digital currency and something like Bitcoin, which is more of an asset as opposed to a currency. And I think sometimes people kind of conflate the two with each other. Any other questions? Oh,
One more.
one up front.
Yeah.
It's Bob, I think. She's coming.
What's it?
What?
Oh, we'll get you, Bob. She got waylaid.
Sorry. Women first, sorry. I just want to say we're so close to the election, very important election as always, and we're so privileged to be able to vote. And I just wanted to do a little plug on PBS and Frontline. If you go to PBS and then go to Frontline, they have an excellent 1-hour program about the people who are running for president, the two. And they do like Trump for a certain topic, and then they do Harris, and then back to Trump and Harris. But it gave me much better view of who they were, how they became who they were, and it was very, very interesting. It cleared my thinking. And they also have one for the vice presidents, which I saw. So each of them are about an hour, but they do the same thing, waltz and then...
Good.
Yeah.
All right, Bob, you get the last question. Hang on, Danny's coming, though. Danny, right up here. Let's get him. He's got to say, nope, keep coming. Behind the camera.
Sure.
I'll take this as our last one.
Well, I want to thank you for speaking with us tonight, first off. I very much appreciate what you've had to say. I've kind of waited here for someone to put up the political lightning rod that no one has yet, and that's government efficiency and how we can simply go in and fire everybody and everything will be fine and we'll save all those dollars. Elon Musk, in his own way, is a genius, and on the other side, kind of nutty. But he has a way of being disruptive in a positive way with technology. Is it realistic to think that there can be any czar of efficiency that's going to fix things with the red tape and the structure of our government?
It's going to be a lot. You can fix it, you can make it better, but you're never going to eliminate it. The inherent nature of government is to make sure you don't make a mistake. I'm speaking as I was a young government lawyer, and it drove me nuts. That's why I left. Because you would get an assignment, some congressman or somebody write a letter in, and then you had to go through 11 areas of review because it's the U.S. government. If you got it wrong, it'd just be a dangerous precedent. And I was dealing with the most minor issues. I was a 25-year-old lawyer. And so it's sort of cut out to the fact that you can't make mistakes. You have to treat each person equally. And your discretion to do things is extremely narrow because it's a government thing. And so cautiousness sometimes is beneficial because it prevents you from having different results and doing different things for different people, and keeps some degree of order. At the same time, it comes at the expense of innovation and other things. So all government agencies that's the crux of the matter. They do get improved. They use the new technologies. They do get better. They finally cleaned up Social Security. They're beginning to clean up IRS. You might not necessarily want it to be more efficient, but I actually think it's a good idea, so you don't have the backlogs. But it's so much more difficult in a private sector undertaking. Procurement has to be assured that it's not politically controlled, that it's safe. You have to know the President of the United States is going to be somewhat involved in some of these things, and that's what makes it difficult. I think Elon Musk will probably be pulling his hair out like anybody else. And you also have the civil service rules, which they do two things. Sometimes they frankly, I sort of saw, and I do this every day, is too many people do nothing. On the other hand, there are too many people, a lot of other people who really are phenomenally good. You want them serving you. And they're making probably 1/3 of what can make in the private sector. I'm glad they're there. And so the incentives on both sides, they just don't have. Our ability in the business is we vet out people who don't do their job, and we reward people who do it really well. They don't have that capability in the civil service structure. That's where I would sort of say, if I had to do one thing, is allow them and give them more latitude to get rid of deadwood, because there's a lot of it sitting there. But there are also a lot of good people keeping this big enterprise aloft.
Cool. Okay, well, we appreciate, obviously, Peter. Appreciate all you guys coming out. Our planning is not crystal ball predicting. It's proactive based on, what's important to you. I think the important thing, Peter mentioned it, we've mentioned it, regardless of the outcome of the election, broader markets move higher, but we can always take advantage of whatever's happening. So I'd encourage you to reach out to your advisor, if you have questions or concerns. Take a look at our website. We'll continue to put up information over the next 2 weeks, and certainly post-election. And then January 18th, we'll be doing our annual resource event with Jeremy Siegel. I'd encourage you to come to that. So with that, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.